Hello and welcome to the companion vMix training. This training is going to be specifically integrating vFocus Companion as a vMix control tool. Now, Companion, what is Companion? Well, vFocus Companion is a tool that interfaces with the APIs of most production software and hardware. Every piece of production hardware or software has some different control method. With Companion, you can control it all in one beautiful, wonderful, awesome place. With vMix, Companion's basically just like the best way to control it. But first off, let's get into how you control it with vMix. vMix actually has two different APIs. The web API and the TCP API. Now, Companion controls everything through the network, through APIs, and that makes it very powerful. Like anything that's on your local network, it can access and control as long as the permissions are such to allow it on that device. But vMix has two APIs, which is very confusing. It confused me for the first 2 years of using it because I would punch my IP address from this website into Companion for the web viewer, and it just wouldn't work, and that's bad. So you can see there are two different APIs. We have the web API and the TCP API. They call it the TCP API because it's a direct TCP connection. It doesn't use WebSockets or anything. So that is on port 8099. That cannot be changed. That uses just raw plain text sending back and forth over that port, and that's how it controls vMix. That is the preferred API method. The web API is cool. You can actually enter URLs into your web browser and control vMix using the web API, which is neat. You can also set it to any port you want. So when you set up Companion, don't go around putting your web API port in the TCP API port because that's not going to work. Here's all of the API calls that vMix has. There's a lot of them. This is why we use Companion, because looking up every single one of these API calls would be tedious to say the least to make a custom control system. You can set shortcuts in vMix, sure, and pull them from this list directly, but it's not very convenient, let's say. If you use a Stream Deck with the built-in vMix plugin, it's mapped to specific button coordinates, so you can't easily move around buttons without changing what they do. It's messy, it's kind of gross, and then it's linked to a profile in vMix rather than just being a global control system that works for everything. Using Companion is simply better and save you a whole bunch of headaches. Just skip to using Companion if you're using vMix. Here's a page for the web API. You can see there's also a telestrator now. Isn't that fun? Here's where you can adjust all your web API stuff, which may or may not be useful for you, but doesn't really have anything to do with Companion. You can see the TCP API is down here, and there's an option to restrict it to LAN only. Time to finish setting it up. Once you have finished installing and clicked next, next, next a bunch of times, you should be dropped onto the Connections tab. From here, all you need to do is search vMix in the Connections panel and click Add. These are the default settings here. They are totally fine as is. Maybe you prefer a linear volume scale. Sometimes I turn up my API polling rate to 100, 10 times per second. It'll get updates from the TCP API for what's going on, and the buttons will work just a little bit faster as well, which is nice sometimes. The next tab is the Buttons tab. This tab will show you a grid of buttons in the layout of a Stream Deck XL. You can change the size of this layout in settings, but it's more common to just not use the buttons outside of the range that you need. So this full grid size still works for a regular Stream Deck, but you would just stop using buttons at the end of the 5x3 grid size. So you would go to here and you would just leave the other ones on the bottom row and off the edge. You just wouldn't put buttons there if you're using a regular Stream Deck. It's generally better to do that in case you get a larger Stream Deck later, rather than map the actual buttons to a smaller size. Although it should be able to be scaled up and down using the new method. And that method is, you can see there's numbers on all the buttons. The way that each button coordinate basically works, how Companion targets a button, is you have three numbers. You got page, row, and then button. You can see each row and button number are there. So row 0, we're indexing from 0, and then 1, 2, 3, and then you have button 0, 1, 2, 3 through 7. So 8 by 4. What's annoying is that the pages index from 1 and the buttons and rows index from 0. So is what it is, because everyone was used to starting at page 1 instead of page 0. Because people aren't used to that. People aren't used to starting at page 0. It's fine. All right, so when you click on a blank button, a panel on the right will show a window for editing that button. So since it is blank, we have to create a button. When you create a button, a few options will appear. Button text string, so that is literally just text. It can also contain variables, but we'll get to those later. Font size, text color, background color, the top bar. The top bar is just a tiny slice of text along the top of every button. It can be disabled in this dropdown. Text alignment, PNG alignment, browse for PNG if you want to use a custom image for your button. Then there's some toggles here. We have progress or progress. And this just means that every time you push the button, it will progress through the number of steps that you have. You can see this is a 1-step button. It just says step 1, and then there's no more. That is default. But you can see there's a plus button on the right where you can add, I believe, an unlimited number of steps. I have not actually added steps until it stopped me before. Rotary actions. So rotary actions is a relatively new toggle. It just adds new actions. So right now we have press and release actions, right? But rotary actions adds actions for rotate left, rotate right. So some control surfaces have knobs or jog wheels, and these rotary actions are very helpful for that. So it adds a rotate left, rotate right, and we'll get into that when we go to the demonstration phase of this. But probably 99% of what you make in Companion will be using the just basic simple buttons. Make a button, put something in the press action, give it a name, and then move on. That is going to be the vast majority of what you do. To create a function on this button, you can click this little folder and it will open a little thing that allows you to browse all of the available functions. You can see we have two things currently, internal and vMix. So you remember how earlier we added vMix into the connections? Well, you can add, like 30 things if you want to, and they will all appear here and they all have functions in them. So you can add like Yamaha mixer, and then you can control a Yamaha CL6 or CL3 or whatever. You can control your audio mixer through this. You can add Blackmagic ATEM and it'll appear in here with all those controls. The options are like pretty cool. They also come with their own variables that are tracked in real time, which are also awesome, and we'll get to those later. Right now, what we want to find is a stinger transition. So we find that transition, auto stinger, select that transition, transition 1. You can see that there's a bunch of options. Transitions 1 through 4 are actually the transitions that show up in the middle of vMix here. They're the ones with the little drop downs. So transitions 1 through 4 will use those versus stingers 1 through 4 will actually use your built-in stingers, which you've programmed ahead of time. And then boom, you have a button. It's set to stinger 1. It says stinger 1. The text clips over, so it says stinger 1. You can fix that by adjusting the font size manually, or even better, uploading images with custom text. The text editor in Companion is bad and always has been bad, and I don't know why it is so bad. So now for a live demonstration. Let's do it. Here is my Companion. Let's add that again, because I have cleared this for the training. Stinger, auto stinger transition. Here it is again. It is back. If I click this, it'll work in vMix. I have vMix open. I will show you that in a little bit. So stinger 1. Now let's make a second button. Let's call it music max. This will just be, you want to bump your music for a break. So we're going to do fade bus volume. And I have to add something here. Fade bus volume. This was not a function until literally like 2 weeks ago when vMix 28 came out. I don't know why it took them so long. But now you can fade audio buses, which is a real godsend, honestly, because before you would have to fade. Like, let's imagine you have 4 music playlists. I know that sounds like a lot. I get a little granular with my music sometimes. I really like music to fit what we're doing. You would just have 4 different actions in here. You would duplicate them out, and there'd be like one for every single audio input, and that's a little rough. So bus B, fade to volume. Let's do 90. Fade time in milliseconds, 2000. And now music max, fades bus B. If you want to see that, I can just bring it over and press the Music Max button on my Stream Deck, whoa, look at it go. That's so cool. Ain't that just the coolest thing ever? So buttons, they're awesome. Another thing we can do is we can add another step. Now, and this wouldn't be a super realistic use case, but let's say after we press it again, we want it to fade back. So fade bus volume back to 0. And we have progress on, right? So every time we press it, it will go from step 1 to step 2. Press it once, it fades down. Press it again, it fades up. Just like magic. All right, now let's make a button that lets us talk to talent. All right, now here we have our video calls. This is where our talent would call in. I'm gonna call them Caster1. Make sure you can right click a call and gives you a whole bunch of options, but I'm gonna set the audio source on these to both be bus F. That's what I want them to hear. So, and I'm gonna call F, I'm gonna rename it to Caster Listen, which doesn't actually fit. So we're gonna name it to Cast Listen, which is what I usually do. Cast Listen, bus F. This is my usual layout. I'm also going to define bus B as our cast output bus. So F being cast listen, I'm not gonna send it to master because I don't want the stream to hear the casters all the time. B cast out, I will send to master because we want the stream to hear the casters.
Is there a logic behind the reason why you chose B for cast out and F for cast listen? Like is there like a specific reason for those letters, or is it just that's what you've always done and that's just your preferred?
That's just, I did it that way one time 4 years ago, and then I didn't do it a different way. You can do it however you want. G I usually say for multi-view output. So like I use my high letter buses for like the back end stuff. So caster listen bus, the multi-view output for the crew to hear. Stuff that's not going to master, I usually put on the
that's
further up
standard.
buses.
A lot of, not necessarily standard, but like most people, including myself and other people who set these up, the ones that are closer to master in, this is in letter closer to A, so to speak, are going to be the ones you use more. You don't want to. You want to set your stuff that's you have to scroll down to. It's stuff that you don't have to look at.
My A bus I usually have as game audio, so that's a pretty easy one to toggle on and off. Usually A and B, I'd say for the majority of small online broadcasts, I only use A and B to master, then the rest don't. Because for replays, I routed directly to master. And how I used to do it was I routed my music directly to master, and I controlled the audio of each music individually. But now, I guess, since we have bus fading abilities, we can do music on bus C and then just fade this bus. So that'll be fun. Yeah, super cool stuff. Now we need to add our microphone so casters can hear us. So let's add that. So this will... Oh, I can hear myself. I don't like that. Something to note, if you add your own microphone, it might be coming in only the left channel. If that's the case, you just want to head over to the channel matrix and route it all like this. We went over this during the vMix audio training, so you should probably understand how this works, but this is not how it is routed right now. This is the matrix of how it will be routed if it gets routed to these channels. And if it's not selected at all, if I routed it to bus G, you wouldn't hear anything. So this is just a matrix of where the channel should go. It's just a channel matrix. It's not a how is it routed right now matrix. That is still defined with these buttons. Going to master, going to A, going to B, right click it, go into, we can do it. Oh, we should turn on show all bus buttons. Ah, this is a good new feature. This one just came out. They're really small, but I actually like this a lot better. This is, I need to make this default. I think maybe you can. I'm gonna call this button PTT cast, PTT meaning push to talk, and it's going to be a two-step button, but we'll get to the second step later. So we're going to look for mute input. You can search in here to like find stuff quick. So vMix audio input mute. So that's what we want, and we want that to go on to, let me find this, audio in one. I'm going to change this to, all right, producer mic. Now it's renamed. So we can go in here. What we want is producer mic. When the button is first pressed, we want it to put the audio on because this is going to be a two-step button. Remember, there's going to be a release or a step 2, depending on how you want to do it. If you want it to be a latch or if you want it to be a hold to push. There's no latch toggle anymore. I kind of wish there was still a latch toggle, honestly, because if you set it up to be a push to talk and used release actions, there's no easy way to immediately convert it into a latch button because they moved everything into steps, which is annoying. Steps are better, but sometimes I just want to make it a latch real quick. Now we have a button. When I press it, my microphone comes on right now. Let's see if I turn it off. When I press the button, it comes back on again. Amazing. Turn it off, press the button. Boom, it's back. So now I'm talking into bus, well, if I route it, I'm talking into bus F here. Now casters will be able to hear me because they're listening to bus F, but now there's no way for them to stop hearing me. So we have to do our release key actions. So let's take our input mute again, take our input producer mic. It does need to match exactly. Now you can use input numbers for this, like input 1, input 2, but I would recommend never doing that because the moment you delete something and producer mic on input 6 suddenly becomes producer mic on input 5, suddenly it's no longer routing it. It's trying to route caster 2 or caster 1. So just don't do that. It's just use input names. As long as you're good about not changing the names once you set them, it's fine. Like,
Well, there's a third option.
there is a third option. There's GUIDs. So every time you create an input, it has a custom GUID that you can access using the web controller. I wasn't necessarily going to show that off because, like, it's a little, it's a little of a hassle, but it is nice that it never changes. So to access that, you just go here to your web controller, open it up, and you can go to your tallies. And tally lights are just lights that change depending on which input is live. So if I click
Well, if
cast,
you also do /API at the end, it'll just list them all. You done that?
on here /API.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can also get them from this. I have seen this XML before. I haven't used it to grab the GUIDs, but I have used this XML before. So you can see input key right here. This big long string. That's input 1. It's video Nissan 4. But this is the GUID. This is the ID. You can put that as the name here, and it will essentially lock this button to that input until the input is deleted. Even if you were to take this producer mic and like change it into a completely different thing, I won't do that because it'll stop it. But let's say caster 2 call. If you were to change it into, I don't know, an image, that button will still work on it if it is the type of input that the button can work on. So GUIDs are cool for that. You can completely change stuff and it'll still work. But of course, if it's named a specific name and you don't change the name, it will also stay connected. I use names just because they're quick and easy, and if you are good about never changing them, then you have nothing to worry about. It's never been a problem for me. However, input numbers have been a problem for me. If you use input numbers, then the only way to remove inputs without screwing up your entire buttons is to like just change it into like a blank color every time you want to delete something, which I've seen people do. It's not the best way to do things, I think. It's kind of messy. All right, let's get this button finished. So producer mic off. We're not using toggle because let's say something was going on and you clicked it, right? If we did toggle, then suddenly every time you let it go, your mic is on, and every time you push it, your mic is off. And we don't want that. That's the inverse of what we want the button to do. So we want every time we push the button, the mic is on, and when we let it go, the mic goes off. We never want anything else, so we don't want to use toggle because toggles. If it's set in whatever state it's set in, it'll do the opposite. And we want to ensure the state that we want, which is on. And then what we want to do is add a internal wait. And what this does is it just delays the action by the specified amount of time. So what we want to do here is set it to 200 milliseconds. That way, when you release the button, it delays that just a little bit so you don't cut yourself off. When you release the button, sometimes it cuts off. There's processing in Windows, vMix. Who knows what the cause might be, but the internal wait rectifies that completely. Next, we want to add a feedback to see when we are actually pushing to talk. It will also be applied to producer mic and we are going to invert it. That way, when we press it, it'll be red, and when we let go of it, it will go back to the default background color again. And that's exactly what we want. Talking, talking, letting it go. Talking, talking, letting it go. And that is our first push to talk button. Now, there's other ways to do it. I like to just toggle mute on my producer mic. Some people leave the producer mic on and just toggle routing to bus F instead, which is also a button option in Companion. And there's also a feedback for it. Route input to bus. So you could just route it to bus F and then use that as your toggle rather than muting and unmuting the input. There's a lot of options, a lot of ways you can do things. But that's generally how it works for pretty much every function. But let's make it a latch real quick, just so that's an option. So let's add a step. Now we have a step 2, and we'll do input mute, producer mic, set audio off. Now we can press it. You can see it turns red. We can press it again, turns off. Press it once, it's red. Press it again, it's off. This has the benefit of being able to toggle it on, be like, okay, casters, and then you can like type on your keyboard, be like, while talking to them, we're gonna go do this thing. We're gonna go do stuff. Are you ready? 5 minutes, and then you can come back, push it again. That's preferred to some people. Some producers stay latched to their entire crew the whole time and only push to talk to talent. So if you have multiple channels set up, like let's say you have a push to talk to bus G for the crew and push to talk bus F for the casters, maybe you want to leave the talk to the crew on. Whatever your case may be, pushing buttons, a lot of fun. And you generally don't do comms through vMix anyway. There's usually some kind of separate setup, like people sitting in Discord is the most basic version of it, but TeamSpeak has a lot of cool comms features which can be utilized in an online production environment. Let's take a look at distutils real quick. You have seen a giant list of items in vMix, and you've seen how some of them work, like the toggle mute or the stinger option, but vMix has all these. And like you saw at that first slide, that scrolling GIF, there are so many API calls in vMix, and not all of them are incorporated into commands in the companion module for vMix. So if you want to do something that's not in there, you got to use the API. So distutils is a great way to do that. It is a up-to-date list of every single API call. And when you click on one, it brings up this fun little menu thing where you can set your IP, and then it will just default to the default port and the API of the web API, and it will run the function. So if you're like web savvy, you could even make your own like custom control panel in a web browser for like talent to use or something, for like a cough button or a talkback button. There's a lot of options. It's pretty cool. The Telestrator also has like 10 blank buttons for you to use that can be set to shortcuts. Any of the shortcuts in vMix that will appear same as distutils, but just built in. The only thing you have to do to use an API command in Companion is to just use vMix scripting, run custom commands, and then you just have to convert it from the web API format to the TCP API format, which basically just means stripping out all of that URL stuff and just putting the function and then a space and then the value. And sometimes there'll be multiple values separated by an ampersand. You can leave that ampersand there. But I used to do this a lot back when they didn't have all of the replay functions. Like they didn't have replay play current events not to output as a function. So I just used an API call for that, and it worked perfectly. Triggers are, well, they're also built into vMix. I'm sure during the first vMix you learned about, the first video I made, you learned about triggers a little bit. So you can, there's a few different events that can cause a trigger. And these work pretty well. They're pretty cool. On playback remaining, on call disconnected, on overlay in, there's on transition in. There's a lot of really cool options for triggering things in vMix based on certain criteria. But Companion has a little bit more of a powerful setup for it. And they added triggers, I want to say somewhat recently, but I feel like it's been over a year. You can add as many as you want. Let's just call this one cycle add. And let's make it on a time interval. Fun fact, I actually used this at a convention. We needed to cycle between a graphic and an advertisement over and over and over again. So I just used a time-based trigger and every 5 minutes it would run the ad, and then it would go back. I've actually used that at a bunch of events now, come to think of it. And you can, if you wanted to use vMix for that kind of purpose, you can literally just get vMix HD for $60 and deploy it on laptops around like events or storefronts or whatever. vMix is very stable, can run for a long time without crashing, so it's a decent application for that kind of thing. But let's say we want it to run every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes, so 300 seconds, we want to run an ad. We can add a condition. So let's say producer mic has to be muted in order for it to actually run. That could be fun. But yeah, you can add any number of conditions. Generally, you just have an event, but conditions are very helpful too. We're not going to use a condition right now, but I'm just showing you these just to know that basically any of the feedbacks that control the colors or the color for this button, this feedback that detects if the input is muted, any of the feedbacks are able to be used in triggers as a condition. We can also use variables, which is pretty cool. Let's get into variables real quick before we finish this toggle real quick. So variables, every single program comes with a bunch of variables. You can also have custom variables and make some, which is pretty cool. You can store values. If you're doing some crazy advanced stuff that we're not really getting into today, mostly you'll be working with the existing variables because those are actually the useful information that already exists that we want to do logic based upon. So sometimes you don't even need to rely on a built-in function. You can just do it yourself because vMix has a whole whack ton of variables. And remember, the TCP API is pulling these constantly. Let's say you wanted to trigger something based on time remaining, let's say. So we have options. We have variables in here for pretty much everything. We can go by input number. We can go by input name, which is what I would prefer. No GUIDs, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Chris. There's no GUID version. But we do have vMix input Nissan.mp4 remaining, which is very helpful for us. So we could copy that, go back to triggers, edit this trigger, condition. We can compare two variables. So we can compare variable input Nissan.mp4 remaining. Let's do less than. Let's create a custom variable. 1 second. Persist value. 1,000. Okay, now we can go back. 1 second. Okay. All right, so theoretically, when this ad reaches less than 1 second left, we should be able to perform a transition stinger 1. But that's only checking every 300 seconds. So we can turn this down to, that is fine. Every 1 second, based on this condition, let's go for it. Let's play this ad out. Let me skip ahead here. 2, 1. Look at that, it's stingered. Oh, and then it's constantly stingering because because it was less than a second for quite some time. And it is a live, it doesn't care that it's in program, it just cares that it's at less than a second. So if I move this over here, it'll stinger. So that's a fun example, right? That's pretty cool. We just used a custom variable in an operation to run a stinger when the condition is true every 1 second that the time remaining on input Nissan.mp4 is less than 1,000 milliseconds. Good job, everyone. We did it, Reddit. Let's get back to setting up an automatic cycler. For this example, we're gonna have a time interval trigger of every 5 minutes, 300 seconds. Now, no conditions because it's gonna run no matter what. That's what we want. You could set conditions if you like. And the action is going to be, well, it's gonna be a whole bunch of things. So we're going to send input to program. It's going to be Nissan.mp4. We're going to go to playback actions and set it to Nissan.mp4. It's going to restart the video. Let's add another playback action for it to play the video, and another playback action to input mute, except we're going to turn the input on, the audio input on. We're actually going to move that up in the list. We're going to have it unmute first and then do everything else. And then we're going to add a internal wait for the duration of the video, which is It's the 30-second ad, so let's do 29 and a half. That way, when the final screen of the ad pops up, it will be stingered over. Now, this is going to vary per your ad. You might not have an ad that has a full end screen like this. You might have an ad that just ends on a person. And depending on the brand you're working with, they might not want you to cut off the ad at all. They might require it is played in full and stops on a still frame and has no parts of it covered up. You might have to work around different constraints, but that's generally how it goes. After 29 and a half seconds, we're going to go back to leaderboard.gtzip. I'm also going to turn off the automatic stuff for it. So we're going to send input to program, this one, and then we're going to go back to playback actions for Nissan.mp4 and pause it. Also mute input Nissan.mp4 and turn the audio off. Now, every 5 minutes, this will run. It'll do its thing. Now we can speed this up. We can click test actions, and it'll do the thing here. Nice that you don't always have to wait. All right, let's see it. 4, 3, 2, 1. Nissan comes up, and we're back on the leaderboard. Look at that. Now, if we had it with a stinger, that would have come over. This is just send input to program, which is just a hard cut. But you can use auto transition with a stinger and set it to an input just as easily. But you have to make sure to put it into preview first if you're going to do that. So every 5 minutes, this will run. And this will be a very consistent way to cycle an ad automatically on some kind of digital signage or what have you. That's a very simple use of a stinger. You could use it to swap out sponsor logos on a specific graphic if you wanted to. There's a lot of different things you could do. In terms of beginner companion stuff, a few things I would like to mention are replay commands. So there's a whole bunch. We're not really going to get into them, but if you're working with replays, it is nice to set the move selected events, the change direction, change speed, set speed, move event, very useful. I've even had companion profiles where I click move event and the move event button jumps me to like page 17, and where there's a whole another set of buttons that all have 2 actions. The first action is which page to move the replay thing into, and the second action is to jump me back to the original page where the first button was. So it's kind of like an expanding button that automatically takes you back when you're done. That's a fun technique to use to save space rather than having 20 different page buttons taking up your Stream Deck. One button takes you to a dedicated page for that, and then you click the button there, which is very fun and cool. Just play with it, really. Like, you're not going to absorb everything from a video unless it gets so granular that I spend an hour on like each individual type of action. Replays, you could go on these buttons for probably 2 or 3 hours. So mess around with it, find a way that works. There are controls for literally everything that you want to do. And if it's not added, basically everything you would ever want is added at this point. But like I showed earlier, the API is there for that one niche API call that's not quite added yet. Or maybe there was a new update that added it, something like that. Just organize your buttons well, color code them. Color changing is pretty easy. Use feedbacks, use colors that work for feedbacks. Like with this push to talk, it's red. Red means hot. You could have your stingers be purple. I often do that. I use darker colors so the text stands out. There's also ways to use variables, which is very fun. So we can actually take any one of these vMix variables and use them as a name for anything. So we could actually take let's see, where is master? Master meter F1 average 1 second. So this is the master audio level averaged over 1 second. So if we put that in the name, you can see right now it's negative infinity dB. But if we play that ad again and unmute it, and restart it and play it, there we go. So now the ad's playing, there's audio coming through. If we look at the button, you can see the button shows in real time what the audio level is. But wait, it gets better. Under feedbacks, we also have, let's see, dB, what is it? Bus live dB value master. Look at this. You can set colors for different decibel levels. So now we see the decibel value, I would recommend actually changing the font size to a set one, because otherwise the audio makes it bigger and smaller, which is annoying. So now you can see it update in real time. I love real-time updates. The buttons connected to variables, super cool. And that's another good use of internal variables. Let's say you had to cycle through player intros or something. You could have an internal variable that tracks what player intro you're on, and you can just click next, 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 and you have a button that constantly shows it so you know you're on the right one. Or you have one that shows what song you're on, because you can even take a feedback. You can go to list, and you can change colors, or you can change style based on selected slide or indexed or virtual set, which are all basically internally the same thing. So under feedbacks, we have input. Let's add a list real quick, just to show this real fast. So now we have two things in here. It is called list, and see now it's red because we have selected one in the index. I'm just gonna add some text here, list. But now if we take this list and select number 2, it goes black. Empty list warning text is black, but that's also the default text. So you might want to change the default if you're worried about the warning. But yeah, if it's selected to index 1, it'll be red. You could add a whole bunch of these feedbacks. You could duplicate it and make it so if it's on number 2, then it's green. So now if we take that list and select number 2, it's green. Very convenient. You can easily check what video you're on, what ad you're on, if you have them color coded. Useful if you only have a few ads and you want to know at a glance which one is selected in your list. Very helpful. Or songs, maybe you have like a favorite song you want to do, who knows? The sky's the limit. The whole point of this is to show you kind of what's possible and then for you to expand on it yourself. The next thing I want to touch on before we end here is Companion Satellite, which is just a program that connects to Companion. So let's say I've got Companion, I've got vMix on this machine, but someone is parsecing in and they want to use their Stream Deck, their in-person Stream Deck. Well, they would download Companion Satellite, enter the IP address and port of my Companion, which you can see in settings. You can see your satellite TCP port right here. You could forward that port so that way they can connect over satellite, which I've done before. And then their Stream Deck will be controlling your Companion. Stream Decks are detected automatically. You can check them out in services. It's never really an issue. If you have a brand new Stream Deck and it doesn't work, they might need to put out an update for it to work with your Stream Deck, since the methods of connecting to Stream Decks changes iteration to iteration. So sometimes it's an issue, but that's all that tab's for. Satellite is very useful for remote broadcast setups. Something else that I want to show real quick is that you can connect basically anything. This is the list of connections. We are only at the D's, and we are still scrolling. F, you can see there's some Focusrite stuff in there. Discord API. We've got Color Light, Canon. Is that a printer? I don't know. Black Magic, everything in here. So much Black Magic stuff. Bird Dog, everything. Yeah, pretty much everything that has a network connection is in here. The ones with an exclamation point may be out of date, so keep that in mind. But yeah, we could just go Yamaha RCP, and then when we go to our buttons, we have a Yamaha drop down for all the Yamaha controls. So you could make it so when you update something in vMix, like you splash a fun graphic on the screen, it also plays a fun sound effect in the Yamaha mixer. So that way the sound operator doesn't need to worry about timing it. Endless opportunities. The fact that one button can send commands to multiple different things at the same time, like a Yamaha mixer and vMix and an ATEM, all with one button press, all taking in variables from those devices. I don't know if the Yamaha has variables. It might. Yeah, it has a few variables that it returns, which is nice. Not that many, but a few. So you can be taking in variables, comparing variables, doing logic, all to make your broadcast or your production or your whatever easier to control long term. I like to say an ounce of setup is worth a pound of in-person panic. And I don't usually say that, but I mean something similar most of the time. When I work on graphic spreadsheets or companion buttons, anything you can do ahead of time that saves you time in person, even if it's like an hour of work ahead of time to save you like a minute in person, that can be so clutch because a minute when you're live is forever. That's time is precious when you're live and you have basically no time to do anything except your role. Make more buttons than you think you need. Make them well, test them thoroughly, as you saw here. Like I tested them and I'm like, oh, I forgot a step. Whoops. It happens. You just got to test everything, make sure it works thoroughly. Oh yeah, and if you want to add pages, you can just go here and add more pages. They used to have 1 through 100 here automatically, but they don't anymore, which is kind of weird, but it's fine.
How does importing and exporting work with, if, for example, I wanted to set this up on my home vMix and I export it? Can I then, in theory, with the same vMix file on a separate computer, import it with, and it would work?
I mean, yeah. So you would just export your configuration here. It'll give you a .companion config file, which I believe is just JSON or XML. Export. It'll download it. It's so small, 2.3 kilobytes. And then you just import it, and it just asks if you want to reset your existing setup. You can also import individual pages, which is nice. So under import, you can see, well, when you click import configuration, it will give you the option of just importing specific pages. And yeah, like this will connect to, as long as it's connected to vMix in here, this will work on any machine. You would want to use the same vMix preset so that way everything's named the same. But of course, it's not that difficult to change your naming convention. You just go in, you just, and if it was called something else, if it was just called Mike, it would be 2 seconds to just change it to Mike. You'd go through and test it, of course, but
But if I was, say, a replay operator, right, and I have my setup with all my junk set up in vMix, and I open up that particular vMix file, and then I import my uh, companion file, I can basically have the same configuration that follows me show to show that I make small changes, right?
yeah, I mean, you can absolutely do that. Even if you don't use the same vMix preset, replay functions are pretty much the same no matter what you're doing, right? They're all pretty hard coded. Like you've got your 20 tabs, you've got your minus buttons. The only thing that will change is probably how many cameras you have. So in terms of replay op controls, you probably don't even need to save your vMix preset. You can probably show up to any vMix replay preset, unless they're having you do some weird stuff, like having you do graphic stuff on your replay machine. Then your companion config, you just roll up, load it on to the replay machine, and you're basically good to go. I've done that before. We've carried the same replay config for the last few PAX shows that I made. And of course, people like tear it apart and make it their own. If you've got a setup you like, you can take it with you.
The other thing that I was playing with the other day that might be useful for people to understand, although probably not something you're doing straight off the bat, there is a custom and connections, a custom HTTP thing. So in theory, if you want to put the hard yakka in, you can have it connect to anything. Generic HTTP requests.
Look at that. Please read this. Generic modules only for use with custom applications.
I was trying to get it to work with Google Mates.
It is cool. It is cool how you can just add whatever you want. I love Vicrio. This is great. You can do hotkeys to other PCs. I've used this to toggle Valorant scoreboard for me as a producer.
Yeah.
So my observers don't need to do it, or my observers don't even need to be remoted in because it's Valorant. So I just have the secondary PCs spectate this spectator, and then I use this program to do hotkeys to other computers on the network.
I actually used Vicrio Listener for the training that we just did in person because for some reason Marvel Rivals was not taking just the hotkeys for, because I just set up, the observer hotkeys 1 through, or FN through F12. Wouldn't take the regular Stream Deck application, so I had to use Vicrio Listener to its own PC to make it work.
Hopefully this was educational. Thanks for watching this training. See you in the next one.